I'm going to talk about the reuse of shipping containers. This is a piece of a shipping container at the end of its life in the shipping industry. The shipping container was patented in 1958, and it is known to have optimized the global transport of goods and the global economy. It's built to be stacked efficiently and to be loaded and unloaded onto cranes, trucks, trains, and ships. And it's built out of corten steel and given an extra layer of marine-graded paint so that it can last for 20 years in the shipping industry, being transported on land and sea across the world. And the diversion of shipping containers into other uses began in the 1970s in the US when the self-storage business took off. And in the container depots, there were many surplus containers left idle because the factories in China were so streamlined to produce containers that it was cheaper to produce new ones and to ship to Europe and US rather than reuse the one-trip containers from Europe and US back to China to transport more goods. And so people started to renovate these cheap and rusty containers into their own sheds and workshops in a kind of DIY method. And gradually this became more and more popular. And in 2008, there were literally no surplus containers left in any depot because people realized that it's a way of construction that is super quick, it's prefabricated, and it can be easily craned or delivered by truck onto sites, and especially useful for sites with difficult access. One of the companies that carry out container conversions and also manufacture new containers is Containers Direct in Liverpool. Their clients range from pop-up restaurants to art galleries to storage sheds that can be reused. They have a welding and joinery workshop on site, and they buy containers of 3 different grades, one-trip, furniture grade, and storage grade. And to carry out these conversions, the process includes wire brushing, painting, installing insulation, melamine lining or timber lining, depending on the use. So melamine is more for offices that they can be easily cleaned, or for toilets or changing rooms, while timber is more for more humanistic personal homes or sheds. And in this process, by dissecting and transforming a welded container in corrugated steel that is super strong and meant to be in the shipping industry transported everywhere, it becomes, it loses lots of its embodied energy in steel welded and given marine-graded paint. And sometimes when a big hole is cut out, it also requires structural reinforcement because the container is not fitted for human inhabitation, but for goods. There are so many modifications and additions that are required. But the main advantage of using containers is that it's quickly built on site and prefabricated. And this became more and more popular as a symbol of adaptive reuse, but in actual fact, with all these modifications, it is the opposite, that it stimulated a new production line of these conversions. Container conversions, as well as containers made with new materials, are marketed as adaptive reuse. But actually, it's a case of skeuomorphism where an object imitates another for its outer form without considering its actual use. They're becoming fashionable to the public, but in actual fact, for developers, it's a quick and easily prefabricated and craned on-site solution for sites that are temporarily available and difficult to access. In cases in London, such as Box Park in Shoreditch, which is a retail space that has a really cheap starting cost for the developers to create kind of spontaneous social spaces, as well as the Container City in the Docklands, which is a cheap artist workspace. This has become increasingly popular in London because land is expensive, and whenever a pocket of land is available for a few weeks or a few months, it's becoming exploited. And the container is the quickest and easiest solution. And this idea of reuse has been exploited and created a new production line of containers made out of corrugated steel, which is not suited for human inhabitation at all, but it's being used for its ease. And that reuse is usually due to economic reasons, to save resources, or for heritage reasons. But in the container situation, it's completely reversed. And to deal with this situation, particularly in London, the question is whether to continue using containers because it's so embedded within the process and within the time and economic constraints of the sites, whether to develop this into a more humanistic architecture, or whether to use a completely different material to build in these really constrained sites with more suitable materials that could potentially be more sustainable or reused.